Welcome to Injector Confidential, a podcast by injectors for injectors. I'm Nicole.
I'm Kristen.
Welcome to your guys' first bonus episode.
Woohoo!
This is kind of just like our coffee talk, is what we've decided.
Yeah, it's going to be short and sweet, straight to the point.
Yeah, no bullshit. Well, actually, that's just us in general, is no
Yeah.
bullshit. But, I think that these will be really great and educational, but bite-sized, and we'll try to have minimal amount of chattiness, but that's really hard for me and Kristen.
Yeah,
It's
real hard.
It's real tough. But nonetheless, our first bonus topic, we're excited about every topic, you guys know that, but has been one, I hate when influencers say this, but this is the damn truth, guys, that it's a question we get all the time.
Mm-hmm.
All the time on TikTok for me, all the time on Instagram.
Oh,
And
yeah.
unfortunately, just with running my own business, I feel like, and Kristen probably feels this way too, I'm not the best about responding as insightfully as I want to be to these DMs because I want to give all the details, but there's just not enough hours in the day.
Oh, totally. I get so many either nurses or college students that are just so curious how to get into aesthetics, or they're burned out or whatever. And it's so hard because I do, like you said, want to give these thoughtful responses and tell about my story. And it's just so hard because there's only so many hours in the day.
Totally. So we're going to give you our bite-size bonus episode, and we're labeling it the hard truths about aesthetics. This is the stuff that nobody wants to hear, and we're going to tell you anyways, because while we were talking about this episode and what we wanted to talk about, both of us agreed that we do not want to do any other job ever. Like, this is our job for life and we love it so much, but I think it gets glamorized quite a bit.
Oh, absolutely. Especially post COVID, where so many healthcare workers are really burned out. Hospital life is really at an all-time low, and aesthetics is getting a little bit more notoriety in mainstream social media, TikTok, Instagram. And so it seems like a really fun, easy thing that people can do. And while it is, and we love it so much, there's definitely some things about the industry and about if you're new to the industry or wanting to get into it that we feel like would be helpful for you to know as you start your journey.
As your aesthetic big sisters, these are the things we need you to know.
Absolutely.
It comes from love, but all of my clients know that I am honest because I love them. If I didn't care, I would just tell everyone what they want to hear all the time. Our first little piece of advice, if you're thinking about going into the aesthetic industry, is that getting into aesthetics is not a cure for burnout. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the times people think that going into this industry will be fun and lighthearted, which, it is. It's so much fun. But I just truly think, like we talked about burnout in our episode about when it's time to quit your job. Personally, I think that any change from one job to another is a temporary cure for burnout because it shifts your attention. But as soon as you get settled into that job, the signs of burnout will pop up in their own ways.
I think that's such a good point. The idea that you can escape burnout without addressing core issues that are going on in your life that led you to that point in the first place is really a disservice to yourself and a disservice to your future career, because there's probably some boundary issues that got you into that situation. There's questioning if nursing is even the right career for you. There's a lot of things that kind of go into burnout as a healthcare provider. And I would just suggest people get really clear on what it is you want your life to look like and what are some things that you can do to shift burnout in your current situation. And then if aesthetics is still where you land at the end of that, then I think it's a great opportunity for you to keep moving forward.
Yeah. So the moral of the story is don't expect to go into aesthetics and immediately feel better because there's many hard aspects that really stretch your patience, your confidence, especially when you're a novice. And if you're not in the right headspace to take on those new challenges, if you are already currently burnt out in your role, you need to do the work beforehand, and then that will make you so much better of an injector.
The unanticipated side of aesthetics that I did not realize getting into it was that there's a whole interpersonal side of this job, as we've talked about on other episodes, that you really have to prepare yourself for, in the sense of like you're being critiqued. It's one thing to get feedback from someone when you're working bedside and like, hey, you could have done this better. It's a whole other thing when you get a bad Yelp review or you
Totally.
get a client that's calling and saying that they're not happy with their work or they want a refund. And so there's just aspects about it that can contribute to burnout still. Definitely take a look at how you got in that situation in the first place.
For sure. And then another thing about getting into aesthetics is that it often involves a pay cut and also working more than 36 hours a week. That's one of our favorite things. And we can only speak to nursing because that's all we know. We're not PAs and we're not MDs. But most of us, I would say, is a big draw to nursing is that work life balance, knowing that you work those 3 shifts and then the other 4 days of the week are yours. But you give that up temporarily, at least. And that might be for a year, a few years, but you definitely give it up though when you first get into the industry. And if you decide to open your own business, like that work life balance is gone. One of the things that I struggled with is that although it's new and exciting and everything is basically refreshing, you're so excited to learn, you usually go from being an absolute expert in your field all the way back down the totem pole to being a novice. And that is so humbling.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It really rips on your confidence. And also, you are so uncertain. It's this weird catch 22 because you're usually, at least for us, we were nurses. You're an experienced nurse. You know how to be a nurse, but this is a completely different field where it almost feels like none of your skills transfer at first.
So true.
And it's like, what have I been doing? I don't regret those 5 years that I worked in peds one bit. I love kids and I love families. But I did question a lot because I was so new and I lost my confidence that I was like, is this the right thing for me? Because I feel so unsure of myself.
Yeah, and it's hard to not take the uncertainty for a I made a mistake in my career.
Yes.
Just know that that is part of it, and like no matter how many training classes you do, no matter how many shadow days you do, you are learning a whole new thing. And really, I mean, maybe you could speak to this a little bit more, but in just regular like RN licensing, not NP, you never really get like a full breakdown of the skin and like from an aesthetic side.
No.
You need to learn not only your scope as a nurse, but things that an esthetician would know and things that a dermatologist would know. And it's so all encompassing. But for me, I definitely took a huge pay cut when I first went into aesthetics. I was working in the hospital, had benefits, 401k, different forms of retirement. I had a union. I went from that to working in a clinic where I was paid probably like close to half. I had no benefit and no shade to my employer. I was new. They were training me. I was not bringing anything into their to their practice at that point. But it was obviously well worth it in the long run. And we'll talk in future episodes of when to know where that stops and you can negotiate a higher salary. But just know that part of it is that you're almost look at it as taking an intern role.
Right.
And I think shifting your perspective going into it will help you because it's well worth it. And I've told several friends, like, either take like a pre-op post-op job or like an infusion job that's lower paying than what they would expect, but they're given the promise of being able to learn to inject and like take it, especially if it's a second income or you're able to just make it work and you have the promise of being trained. Like it is well worth it.
Absolutely. And I have had friends that went from being in the hospital and they took a job in plastics,
Mhm.
doing pre op, post op, like what you were saying, and then learned to inject on the side. And I think that that was such a great, well rounded education where they were still getting paid. So it took that financial stress off. And then the fact they were learning to inject was like such a fun bonus.
Totally.
And they were training with plastic surgeons that themselves injected.
Yes.
It's very different if you're training with somebody who doesn't inject on a regular basis. I don't know. Did you get trained by a plastic surgeon who actually injected?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. It was two plastic surgeons and there was no one other injector. So they were the ones doing all the injecting. But where it was like so beneficial for me, I mean, I started injecting, but I also worked in the OR and I got to watch them do a lot of facelifts
mhm.
and fat transfers. It really has made me a more well rounded injector to be able to see the differences in surgical results, non surgical results. That's probably my biggest piece of advice for people who are trying to get into the industry and are working more of a bedside job is it's fairly easy to get a pre-op post-op job at an outpatient clinic where plastic surgeons are or in a surgery center. specifically dedicated to plastics. And that's a great way to have your foot in the door. Just, have that conversation before you actually get hired. So there's no misaligned expectations.
Totally. And I was just thinking to myself, you probably had your own like pseudo cadaver lab that way,
Pretty much.
being able to see the planes of the face and stuff
Yeah.
when they're doing like a deep plane versus I don't know the other kind of facelift. But
Yeah,
you can see
absolutely.
that's a great point. I was just thinking about circulating in the OR. Like that would be such a nice little addition.
Totally. And then watching them do the fat transfers
Yeah.
was super cool. And then getting to be in the office to follow up for post-ops and follow-up
Yeah,
appointments.
get to see the whole journey.
Yeah,
Oh,
super cool.
I would 10 out of 10 recommend that based on Kristen's experience
Yeah,
too.
absolutely.
And, we'll talk about this too, but you don't have a union to protect you anymore. And we are in California where our union is banging. And on most of the West Coast, the union's banging. And they ensure that you get paid properly, that you have breaks, that you are protected. It's pretty much something that I just came to like expect and I got
Right.
took for granted. And luckily, I haven't had anything that has made me need to have a union as an aesthetic nurse, but it is nice to have that comfort of working in the hospital and knowing that your wage is secured and you will get paid. It's just not like that. I don't think that we'll ever probably have an aesthetic union just because it's so different across the board from employer to employer, injector to injector.
Totally. And I know in California, we're an at-will state. So basically, an employer can fire you for really no reason at
True.
all. And so, whereas, if you're protected by a union, there has to be a just cause. And usually there's a process of due diligence that goes into that. Even in my hospital career, I don't feel like I really utilized my union. So I didn't really recognize that leaving bedside and going into a clinic. But it's definitely something to consider, especially if you are at a point in your career where maybe you are involved on committees and all of
Mhm.
that. But the aesthetic industry is changing a lot, and we can definitely use big voices for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we talked a little bit about this a couple minutes ago, but at the beginning, you don't have work life balance. And we were laughing before this episode because I said that my career as an injector and now in my own practice is like a fixer upper where it's kind of like this dilapidated shack at first that needs a lot of work, but it's mine and I bought it. So I'm invested in it. I think it's beautiful, but it takes work. And I pretty much all I'm doing is trying to build that dilapidated shack into a nice fixer upper home. Whereas my life in the hospital was a lovely condo with an HOA and a lock it and leave it. I could just leave work, not think about it. And I can only speak for myself, but I was really good at compartmentalizing as a new grad. Once I had gotten through therapy and kind of worked through my feelings of needing to take on more and more and more, I actually became really good at compartmentalizing and being able to leave work at work and relax on my days off. And I know that's not like that for everybody, but I had that and I really enjoyed it. And it was quite the shocker to me that when I got into aesthetics, that once you're done injecting for the day, I mean, I was also in school. I was also, writing my papers, doing all that, studying, but you're also doing your social media, which for me, it was at the ass crack of dawn in the morning or late at night,
Mhm.
responding to emails, clients, all of that. You're doing that in the time that you're not injecting.
Absolutely. And charting. Charting is
That's one thing that I said that I would never say outside the hospital is like, I'm so behind on charting, but that's literally every day of my life.
yeah, I don't think I was nearly as far behind on charting in the hospital as I am on a day-to-day basis now.
I was diligent because I had my shift ended.
So at my first job, we were paper charting. And so there was like a good cutoff. Like I couldn't take my charts home. It stopped at 5. And now that there's electronic charting, it has been definitely harder for me to have work-life balance because I can just be like, oh, I'll just do that when I get home.
Yeah.
Or I can just do that when I wake up in the morning or whatever. Especially when you're not an hourly employee. It's like, well, I don't want to stay in my office any longer than I have to. But yeah, the work-life balance piece is definitely something that I recommend that if you don't have currently as a hospital employee, definitely start working on setting those boundaries while you are looking for a job in aesthetics because it will only benefit you to get that piece under control. And then also too, the thing that people don't realize when they leave bedside is that aesthetics, it's definitely a high risk area of nursing and is very litigious. When it comes to the high risk piece of the medical portion, with Botox and all that, most people think, oh, the worst thing that's going to happen is a dropped brow. And for the most part, that's totally true. But when you have someone sitting in your chair and you're questioning a vascular occlusion and you're wondering, like, could this make a person go blind?
Mm.
Definitely puts it into perspective. Like, okay, yes. Is it as scary as working labor and delivery and the stakes are so high that like a baby or a mom could die? Okay, no. And I'm thankful that I'm out of those really high stress situations. But the reality is there is risk involved. And when it comes to the legal side, you not only have just the medical piece, but there's a lot more that goes into it as far as contracts, non-disclosures, mile radius of where you can work and can't work, and client lists and all of that. So there's just a whole other aspect of this field that I think Nicole and I both didn't fully recognize until we've left different places of employment. And not to say that that would ever be a deterrent for us getting into the field, but I think it's definitely something I wish I would have known when I first started.
Yeah, just so then you can protect yourself and be
Mhm.
mindful. A trainer told me that people think injecting's easy. Injecting is blind surgery. And
Yeah.
I remember I just was like, yes, it is, because we know facial anatomy. That's another thing I had to teach myself,
Mhm.
was facial anatomy with muscles, bones, ligaments, um, veins, arteries, all of that. We're just blindly going based off what is the normal and how to find those abnormals, but we really don't know 100%. Even with ultrasound, you don't know 100%. So it's taking that blind risk.
Mhm.
And I like to think of this career as extremely high risk, extremely high reward.
Mhm.
I would take the risk any day. But that's why it's also so important that you do invest in yourself and get trained. I will say right now that this makes me sound really shady on paper. I have had no formal injecting in education outside of trainings.
Yeah, same. Instagram, that was my training for
Apprenticing,
for a long
essentially, like
time.
what you said about it
Yeah.
being like an internship. I seriously felt like a cobbler at first. The people that make shoes.
Mhm.
That's what injecting reminds me of. Like, you watch the cobbler and they choose you because they see potential in you making their shoes, right?
Right?
And then eventually, like, you help them make the shoe and they let you touch the shoe and hold it. And then eventually you're the one making the shoe and they're just watching you. And then you're making the shoes on your own. It's the same thing with
It
injecting.
absolutely.
Like, it's like being a cobbler.
Totally, and
It's
there
an
really
art.
there's, like, no standardization for, like,
No.
this is, like, what you need to accomplish to get into this industry. It's just like, some people have really extensive training programs
Yeah.
within the wherever they're getting hired. Some people are just trial by fire, and I think back I did get good training as far as, like, an aesthetic eye, but when I
Mhm.
think back of, like, how much I didn't know about anatomy, how much I didn't
Totally.
know about like, I'm fairly new to cannula, like,
Same.
I got trained by amazing people, and
Right.
so I just think back to, like, oh, some of the stuff that I like, you don't know what you don't know, and I think back 5 years ago, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it's amazing people still follow me."
Oh my gosh, I know. I think about that all the time. I'm still fairly new within the last year to cannula, and I'm
Mhm.
still perfecting that craft. And I mean, I forced myself to do it at trainings because have a major love-hate relationship with
Totally.
it. On the topic of education, I think part of it is just like what we've talked about in the past about having a really clear contract with wherever you get hired about training expectations, shadowing. Is it okay for me to shadow somebody else in the area? Can I go someplace else? Do I have a stipend? This is rare, so don't take this verbatim. Is there a stipend for me to take educational courses? We'll give some resources too in the show notes about continuing education opportunities, but a lot of it is going to be sought out on your own. It's very, very rare to have a built-in curriculum. Incredibly rare, a built-in
Mhm.
curriculum into your first job or any job.
Absolutely, and even the trainings that are usually offered by reps and stuff, they are just so much on label, and
Totally.
a lot of times, as valuable as they are, you usually walk into the training and it's like, "Okay, what do you wanna learn today?" As opposed to it being like, "Okay, you've progressed to this point in your aesthetic career. This is the next step. Now we're taking you know how to do cheek on bone. Now we're gonna take you to where the next logical step would be cheek with cannula and tear trough." There is no, like, natural progression. It's very self-led. And so Along with that, I would definitely recommend having a close circle of injectors that are ahead of you. So that way you can see, you can get advice, and then you can see, okay, what are they doing that I should be learning? Or I'm not quite there yet, but I know that that's in my future.
You got to be a lifelong learner in this field and just like be a big nerd and love it. And also have the humility to know that, like, one of my favorite things that Erica Berry says in her Patreon, one of my favorite resources, I get the $50 a month one. Every morning, I just sit down and watch one video. I love it. She says, I'm changing my injection technique all the time,
Absolutely.
all the time.
Absolutely.
I mean, and it's so true. Her technique changes like every couple months, and the outcome is always amazing.
Mhm.
But the way that she gets there is different, you know? And I just love that honesty and the candor about how she is always changing up and improving. And she's one of the best injectors in the country and probably the world. So that says it
Absolutely.
all. On top of investing in yourself, I think it's a reasonable expectation that you will be working weekends and usually evenings when you start, just like when you work in the hospital and you start on nights, you start with the shifts that need to get filled. And usually that's Saturdays, sometimes Sundays. You're accommodating when people can come in
Mhm.
when you're new.
Absolutely. And if it's not that you're actually working, like seeing patients, because my office was closed. My office, when I first started, was Monday through Friday. So there wasn't a Saturday option, which I think is very rare. But there's always something that you should
Right.
and could be doing. So for me, that would be like social media on the weekends or trying to watch those videos. There's always something that you can and should be doing. And that is going to kind of bleed into your evenings and weekends. And just know that you will hit a point in your career where you can have really strong boundaries. And Nicole and I will talk definitely more about that in future episodes. So it's not a forever thing. We don't want you to think that you're trading one crazy work life balance in
Right.
the hospital for another. It's just go into it with the expectation that there's dues to be paid. And it's not in the sense of like, oh, this is the hierarchy and like you need to, we're going to haze you into the aesthetic industry. It's just genuinely, there's just so much to learn, and people don't realize that until you get started. And that's why we're here, because we don't want to be gatekeepers. We want you guys to know what you're getting into so that you can have the most successful aesthetic career.
Totally. And I mean, up until recently, within the last 6 months, I worked every single Saturday.
My gosh, really?
Yeah, but at the time it kind of worked for me
Mm,
being in grad school.
yeah.
And my Saturdays continued to be stacked and it was a half day. But man, that freedom of being able to be like, I think I'm going to work every other Saturday. And now it's at once a month. I'm like, this is money.
Totally.
But I mean, I was so eager to work in aesthetics. I would have agreed to work probably every Saturday and Sunday.
Totally.
I lost my
Totally.
boundaries because I was so desperate, which I like don't really recommend, but I feel like a lot of us do that because we just want
Yeah.
in so bad.
It's hard. It is. That's a hard aspect of it, but I think that there's a balance of like having your self-respect and like what
Totally.
works for you,
Yeah.
and also recognizing like this is a really great opportunity.
Yeah. And how long am I willing to just put the time in?
Yeah.
But there are some tips that we can offer about getting into aesthetics that we feel like helped us and will definitely help you guys. So what I tell people is that the connections are out there in aesthetics. You just have to find them.
Absolutely.
And
I have nurses reach out to me all the time asking if they can shadow me. I say yes every time.
yeah, and I come from retail where the worst thing that somebody can say to you is no. And the more that people say no to you, you just get used to it. And then you're like me, you have a shame-ectomy and you just don't care anymore. So you just don't care. And my favorite thing is connecting and engaging with as many local injectors and med spas as possible, especially the small ones. Eventually, they will post on Instagram that they are hiring. And you know what? You apply. Even if you have no experience,
Absolutely.
apply, bring that personality and know what you bring to the table, and they will hire you based on potential.
Totally engage with their social media.
Comment,
Yeah, absolutely.
share, like do all of that. I think that the people that I have seen grow and start from the bottom and work their way up, they were really engaged in the community. And I think that really helps them too, mental health wise, getting started.
Because then when you do have that opportunity to get started, you have a built-in support network of
Mhm.
people that you have connected with and had relationship with for, maybe possibly years. So
Yeah.
that's great.
And then injectors and med spas will do local beauty events, usually with other small businesses, which is really cool. I mean, I continue to do those kinds of things because I think it's just a great way to bring clients together and support other businesses. But I actually got a job doing this, so I can tell you firsthand this works. If you go to the event, pay the price, go to the event, walk up and introduce yourself to the owner, the injectors, whoever it is, and tell them that you want to do what they do. I just think that there's such value in seeing somebody's face and talking to them, because then when they need to hire someone, you will be the first person they think of.
And that's the type of person they want to hire, is someone who's tenacious, who's going to have the ability to come up and engage and show that they're wanting to make it work.
Yeah, definitely. And this is a little bit like working from the inside out. Become a client.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, one of my favorite injectable bars, that's what I call it because it's not really a med spa, the treatment in Claremont and in the LA area. One of the injectors that they hired, who's an MD, she started out as a client.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and I mean, now she's an injector. So even if you're just going in and they offer facials at that place, somebody is going to say, "Hey, I have a client. She's awesome and she's really interested in doing this, and she's a nurse or whatever. She's a
Totally.
PA." And so working that kind of like interior work from the inside, and then you also know the inner workings of, you have that client experience, which I also think is so valuable, being like, "Oh, I've been to this place and I've had this Botox experience, and then I had this great Botox experience, and here's the difference, and this is how I'll make it different."
I
But
think being a client is huge, whether it's to gain opportunities through that particular med spa, or if it's just, like you said, to understand the client experience and to just get familiar with how much is a normal amount of Botox, what kind of filler is being recommended, pick their brain in the consult. You should be getting the treatments that you will one day be recommending for sure.
yeah, and it's absolutely like not a prerequisite that you have to get a ton of injectables. But I do think, like, from a personal experience, like having Botox everywhere, having Dysport
Mhm.
everywhere, having filler, having dissolved filler, I feel like it makes me so much better of an injector because I can tell
Absolutely.
people firsthand, like, yo, the first time you get lip filler, the next day you're gonna look like you're auditioning for Pornhub. And people take that a lot more seriously if it's coming from you.
Totally. And even if like you decide, you know what, I don't need to continue to do Botox in my masters, or I don't always want to get my lips done, to just say you've done it and have had that experience goes so
Yeah,
far.
it's a lot of credibility.
Totally.
We're going to put these resources at the bottom, but I love Patreon. And eventually you will love our Patreon when that eventually comes
Yes.
out. But like I said, I love Erica Berry. And then I also love Rhonda Kennelly. She owns the Confidence Bar in Chicago. They are both amazing teachers. They have good basics, really good advanced, good for beginners and experts all the same. And
And
then
really reasonably priced
really
too.
reasonably priced. And guess what? That is a tax write-off, baby. So you
Absolutely.
you save those receipts and you send them to your CPA, stay out of jail, and get yourself some money back. And then Palette is another, so that's Palettte. They have nice little bite-sized continuing education on different topics. And now I didn't even write this down, but Vanessa Lee also
Oh,
has her
yes.
own education.
I've taken one of
You have?
her. I went to one of her, it was like a day long thing. It was several years ago, and she did it with Melissa Berg, the beauty nurse.
Yes.
It was awesome. I was a brand new injector,
It's
and it
amazing.
was so good.
Power combo.
Yeah, absolutely. Another great one is Injectability in LA. She's really a powerhouse to me too, not only injecting, but branding. She has such a
Totally.
unique brand, one that I've never seen
Mm-mm.
in aesthetics. Amazing trainer. She's very well renowned, and they have their own courses and stuff that you can look into as well. But I love her stuff. She's wonderful.
Did you see she trademarked Microtox?
No,
Yeah.
good for her.
And she's been calling people out on using it.
She's
I just absolutely
bought.
I absolutely loved that. And then she put out an Instagram story. She was like, "Sorry if you've gotten an Instagram message or a letter from us, but that's our trademark."
I love that though.
I love that. I
Yeah.
know. I was like, "Yeah, trademark Microtox. Now I won't use it."
Yeah, damn it.
Like, damn it. Okay, mini talks. I don't know. And then the treatment, we all know how much I love them. Also in the greater LA area, they are starting a program right now. It's more for experienced injectors, but they are starting one for beginners. And I can't say enough good things about their injectors. And Erin Jensen, who's the owner, she's a trainer for Allergan and Galderma. She's amazing. And this is
Probably my favorite thing that Nicole added to this list, the fake face. I'll let her speak to that one.
okay. So just stick with me on this one. I have a fake face. It's silicone. And the inside, it has a skeleton, a plastic skeleton on the inside, and it's silicone on the outside. His name is Paul. And he's this creepy ass face that I bought on Amazon. And it's actually made for, I think, cosmetologists to practice makeup on. I practiced facial anatomy, what to do with my hands, how to inject, how to aspirate. That's how I learned.
I love that though. And so the silicone, could you actually like inject
Yes. Yes.
Really?
Yeah, you can inject it.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah,
I love
so I
that.
practice with
Thanks,
like
Paul.
yeah, so Paul has been my go-to and he just sits in my closet now and scares me every now and then. But I used to like prop Paul up and that's how I learned to one-handed aspirate.
Wow.
Yeah, I got good at that kinetic wise. So the fake face, I think if you put this is your search history, do this on incognito. If you put silicone face into Amazon, you'll be able to find it.
I would love, and if you come up with them, if you have some really cool Google searches that pop up because you're searching silicone face, we'd love to see those as well.
Screenshot and tag us, put it in the story. But if you have taken a educational course from a fellow injector, we would love to hear about it.
Absolutely. We are all about empowering. In fact, today is Wednesday, so we are going to be featuring some women in the industry that are
Whoop,
just
whoop.
doing amazing things. So definitely make sure you watch out for that. And if you have things that you're doing that are incredible and amazing in the industry, we would love to know about it so we can feature you and just keep supporting each other.
Thanks for tuning into this bonus episode. We hope it was helpful and we will see you guys next time.